I don't know about you guys, but I absolutely feel like crap. And the reason why I feel like crap is because I didn't do anything when I woke up this morning. But you wanna know what? I just don't have any motivation to do anything. Because as of right now, I want to play Hearthstone, but I really don't feel like I can play Hearthstone because unfortunately this card is driving me insane. It is actually getting to the point where I feel like I have to record a video, and it's not even about Ignis himself is the problem. You guys already probably are aware of what I'm going to be talking about, but it is Windfury. Windfury, I believe, is absolutely ruining the game, and I wanted to use this time in order to really talk about my thoughts on the keyword because, unfortunately, this is not the first time that Windfury has absolutely warped the meta, so to speak, but I just wanted to more so talk about the feelings of Windfury because I really don't think it's that good of a keyword because Windfury minions are either completely unplayable or they absolutely break the game, and unfortunately, this is just a fact of Hearthstone where things are either not good at all or they're meta-defining. So it's just a matter of, well, what can we do if this card continues unchanged? And I really do believe there just needs to be one massive change that needs to happen to Ignis, and that is that the 1 mana weapon is not able to have the Windfury keyword attached to it. And I'm gonna use this opportunity to really talk about the design of this card in general because I think that Ignis is a really well designed card. Cards like Kazakus are another example of how, this kind of effect is actually not that bad, because if you guys aren't aware of Kazakus, the original one, not the remade one, but if your deck has no duplicates, you get to craft a custom spell, and honestly, those custom spells were really powerful. Like, you had a way of polymorphing all minions on the field, you had AoE damage, you could gain armor, you could add random demons to your hand, which really wasn't that good. But there was one key difference between the 1 mana potion and the 5 mana potion, as well as the 10 mana potion that was possible. The 1 mana potion did not allow you to polymorph minions because having a 1 mana polymorph is absolutely busted. At least it was at the time. So, because if your opponent had a Sylvanas or a Death Rattle you didn't want to deal with, for 1 mana you could essentially remove it. If this card was remade today, probably would actually have the polymorph effect. But for consistency, I kind of like what they did, where 5 mana you had one polymorph minion that would happen randomly, and then you have the 10 mana one that would just polymorph all minions. So it's really hard in order to have an in between those two effects. But when it comes to Ignis, I really do believe that we just need to get rid of the 1 mana Windfury, because the one thing that really makes me upset is when you have all of these cards that give your hero attack, and even Demon Hunter, for example. Demon Hunter doesn't really have a way of really being meta relevant right now because it gets absolutely blown out. But one deck that I will be showcasing in a future video that hasn't been posted yet is actually this deck right here, and the only real way that this deck seems to win is because of Ignis having Windfury on the 1 mana weapon. This isn't a deck where you want to go for the 10 mana weapon and go for big boards. This deck is just all in on trying to make Dispose of Evidence work with momentum after you draw a bunch of cards, so that way you can just have a 1 mana Windfury and then give your hero essentially plus 14 and attack, and that's not even going into the Serenite Shambler that can also go into this. So this deck pretty much has a 60% win rate, not because it wins 60% of its games, but 60% of the time you get the Windfury off the 1 mana weapon and you just absolutely win the game because of it. But besides Demon Hunter, there's still a lot of other heroes that are able to do this. Obviously Druid is driving me crazy right now. It's driving everybody crazy, and it's mostly due to the fact the Windfury is really powerful, not only in Druid, but it's also because of Mana Cheat and because of Fizzle. So Ignis is not 100% to blame for this, but it is still very possible. Paladin has been given Windfury as well, which I really think is absolutely ridiculous because they still have cards like Feast and Famine as well as for Kel'Thalas. But then there's also Shaman, which is the original Windfury class that barely has any support for it because they're probably too scared of giving more attack buffs to Shaman, since they can actually run the Windfury card in their deck, not only with Doomhammer, but also with Horn of the Windlord, which probably just the worst version of Doomhammer in all honesty. And then, of course, you have Warrior, but the biggest difference with this is the fact that Odin exists, so you can give your hero attack even if you're not playing these kind of cards that already are giving your hero attack, you just have armor cards. But the real biggest problem with Windfury, and why I know it's not been like problematic in a while, is that like cards like Goldwing, for example, I think are Windfury done right. Because this card is something that gives you immediate impact, and it's mostly used as a double trading tool. It's not meant to absolutely kill your opponent. While when your hero has Windfury, when every single class has access to it, it becomes extremely problematic. So again, I think what they need to do, the Ignis weapon, is just make it to where the 1 mana option does not have Windfury available, just because it seems a little bit too fine-tuned in some of these classes, such as Druid and Warrior, for example. Because like I don't mind Odin Warrior having access to Windfury some of the time, but again, it's the 1 mana Windfury to where if you want to be able to have this insane weapon with a bunch of value, you need to have it be somewhat counterable by Viper, and Viper's not even a counter to half of these decks anymore, so it's like, what are we supposed to do with these tech cards that just aren't serving their purpose as of right now? Shaman obviously has a ton of Windfury cards because it is part of its class identity, so I don't think we really need to do anything about that. If you stick an 8 mana Windfury minion and then you happen to win because of it, at least you made it to turn 8 and you were able to, you know, play a big minion that your opponent doesn't have an answer to. So I don't mind that being a thing. But like another example of exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to Windfury cards is the original Windfury win card, Whirling Zap-O-Matic. In case you guys aren't familiar, there were some times where Shamans would coin this on turn 1 back in the old days of Goblins versus Gnomes, and then they would give it a Rockbiter weapon. And back then, Rockbiter weapon was actually a 1 mana card. I can't remember exactly when it was nerfed to 2 mana. I think this was around the time it actually happened. But regardless, turn 1, you coin this out, and then on turn 2, you can play double Rockbiter weapon in order to deal 18 damage with this card. So this was like the very first time that a Windfury card was absolutely massive, as well as Shaman actually having a spell that just straight up gives a minion Windfury. This card was also very good because of Rockbiter weapon at the time, but it wasn't nearly as played as obviously Mech Shaman at the time, because there was a lot of Mech support for a Shaman back in the day. And then you have Speaker Ghidra. This card wasn't really that meta-defining, but it was still a good inclusion, but it was more so a Druid card, actually, because you had ways of being able to give this card a bunch of stats all in one turn. If you had 8 mana, just to play a 5 mana card on it, it becomes a 6/9, and not only is that a nice stat line, but regardless, it was really powerful. But another card that I wanted to bring attention to is Battleground Battlemaster. And also another example we'll get to here in a second. But Battleground Battlemaster was like another example of what happens when when every single class gets a neutral Windfury card. And honestly, this card was very meta warping in Paladin, because all they would do is make a big minion, you're not able to clear it, and then they would have Battleground Battlemaster as like the checkmate move. And I'm not necessarily upset that decks have lethality, but it makes me really frustrated when I see these neutral cards having such a powerful keyword that is either going to be completely unplayable because you can't possibly stick a big minion at the higher ranks, or it's going to be absolutely meta defining because all you need now is like a 10 attack, 15 attack combination of stats in order to win the game. And luckily with this card, or I should say unluckily actually, if you had 8 minions, then you were just able to deal 32 damage without even really trying. And this is really the biggest problem that I feel like Hearthstone has historically, is what happens when you double the damage. Because you could argue that cards like Divine Spirit and Inner Fire are another example of this, because you're doubling the output. It's essentially Windfury, but instead of being able to attack twice, you have twice the stats being added to your minion and stuff like that. Same thing with mechs. Mechs having Windfury, like this entire expansion has been completely plagued with Windfury, and we haven't even like spent this video talking about Mech Rogue, but that was another thing. Being able to die by turn 3 because of Mech Rogue being able to just stick Windfury on whatever big minion, and mechs are all about, you know, getting charged with Magnetize and stuff like that. So I'm just really trying to use this opportunity to talk about why I really don't like Windfury when it's so cheap and it doesn't feel like it has a downside. And going back to Crab Rider, for example, this is another great example of what happens when you give Windfury to a card that just sticks and just will not die. So being able to coin this out on turn 1 as Paladin, and then you have a bunch of buffs in the deck because that's all that Paladin does. You had Hand of a Doll, which I believe gave +2/+2 instead of +2/+1, which is part of the reason why the card got nerfed is because of cards like this. So you had a 3/6 minion by turn 2 that was unkillable, and then if you had another Hand of A'dal, it suddenly became a 5/8, and it was just, it was absolutely ridiculous how quickly and how easily you could steamroll games, and that's just really what I'm trying to say, dude. Windfury is one of those mechanics to where it's either garbage or it's really good, because if you look at all the other Windfury cards, this didn't really see play. Corpse Taker actually saw a decent amount of play, and then this is another example of how I would like Windfury to be utilized, actually, because you have to build your deck around it. Makes a lot of sense. You're not just throwing out this minion and just getting value out of it. But even Raging Worgen and Charge Warrior was another great example to where you would just play this minion, give it charge, and then you play double Inner Rage in order to make this card completely unkillable. And just, again, the mechs. The From the Scrap Heap is just a card that I absolutely hate to see in Standard, because, I mean, Mech Rogue's not really that powerful at the top ranks, but I imagine the lower ranks, this deck is still very frustrating, to say the least. And, okay, I was wondering if it would show, like, other Spark bots, but I guess not. But yeah, that's really all I wanted to say, is that if Windfury is going to continue being a keyword that gets printed over and over again, we gotta stop making it cost 1 mana or 2 mana. Like, if you're gonna bring back the Windfury spell for Shaman, that's one thing, but when a minion has thick stats, Windfury, and is already super hard to kill, then all it's going to do is just make things a lot more stressful for players, because right now we're in a Windfury meta. We've been in a Windfury meta for quite some time, and I think that's the real reason why a lot of people are annoyed of these kind of archetypes, because it feels like you have no agency against them unless you have your one specific card to try and counter it. But unfortunately, you really can't counter a gigantic mech by turn 3, turn 4 that has all of these stats, because Rogue also has prep in order to play this essentially for free. So it's just one of those things to where I really wanted to make a video talking about this topic, because I am sick and tired of Windfury absolutely bombing me, and I just want to be able to enjoy some Hearthstone to where I have some minion trades, I have ways of being able to play big minions that maybe aren't just going to be immediately answered every single time. As long as those minions don't have Windfury, then the need for having those clears is not necessarily as massive. Like, one thing I kind of miss is being able to use my face and my health as a resource to where if I need to, like, make an unfavorable trade in order to win back favor of the board, then that's something that you used to be able to do. But now with Windfury, it's like you literally can't even take that chance, because what if they hit that 60%? What if they have the Windfury Sparkbot in hand? What if the Paladin is always going to have their buffs on their hero every single time that they play that weapon? And since Viper really doesn't have much of application in this meta, there's no point in really running it, even though in top legend you have to probably be running Viper because of how prevalent Druid is. And Druids really don't want to go for 1 mana Windfury in this meta because they have ways of being able to refresh their mana because of ANR, but there's a lot of things that are wrong with Druid overall. Like, you could argue it's the ramp, you could argue it's how easy they can draw through their deck, you could argue that it's Yogg-Saron, but at the end of the day, what's killing most players is the fact that heroes can attack twice. It doesn't really feel like it comes that much at a cost, and it's just the new meta, so to speak. Like, Ignis, I believe, is sitting at like a 40% win rate, or not a 40% win rate, 40% inclusion in all decks. In fact, let me just go ahead and pull up the stats real quick. But here you go. Sitting at the top is obviously Yogg-Saron, but sitting at second is Astalor and Ignis if we look at just legend data. If we look at diamond data, 46% Yogg, 34% Ignis. At diamond, 44% Yogg, 36% Ignis. At diamond, 46% versus 37, and then in the platinum ranks, Yogg is in about 40% of decks, and Ignis is in 37% of decks. So this is kind of begging the question, why is Zeddy saying that Yogg is included in 60% of decks when I am not seeing that statistic? Maybe it's the filter that I have on, but regardless, I really just wanted to use this time to talk about how Ignis is not only, like, extremely powerful, but it's mostly just super annoying. I am sick and tired of dying to Windfury, and that's pretty much all that I have to say, so feel free to leave your comments down below talking about the cards that you don't like that much, because this is really something that I've been feeling on my streams, and has been very annoying, so to speak, because I don't feel like there's a lot of ways of really being able to play around this weapon outside of my opponent just missing the 60%. But it's a 60%. Which also, okay, one more thing I should talk about before I end the video is that it also makes Ignis a lot more frustrating when a deck like Demon Hunter, for example, absolutely needs to hit the Windfury to win the game, and then suddenly you just don't hit it. That's usually a positive thing where it's like, okay, how can I work around the card in order to get the win now that I didn't get my high roll? But it's usually just, it's a feels bad for your opponent when it happens. It's a feels bad for you when it doesn't happen. And then there might be some times where you win with the Ignis weapon because you didn't get Windfury, but it just doesn't feel that accomplishing sometimes. I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting sick of this meta. Maybe I just am getting a little bit burnt out because this is the most that I've streamed in the past 2 months, and I'm really thankful that we've had such a successful stream in the past 2 months. But in terms of like the playability of the game, I think the Ignis weapon, the 1 mana Windfury has to go.